I'm a welder by trade, and I live my life by tolerances. In my line of work, a millimeter is the difference between a joint that holds and a joint that snaps under pressure. I don't believe in luck, and I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in steel, gravity, and being prepared. I believe in things I can measure with a caliper. I live in a converted A-frame about 10 miles north of Ely, Minnesota. It's the kind of place where winter isn't a season, it's an occupation. It's a physical adversary that tries to kill you for 5 months a year. You don't fight it, you outlast it. When the forecast called for a historic blizzard last February, I didn't panic. I just went down the checklist. I filled the propane tank. I stacked 3 cords of birch by the back door, enough to keep the wood stove roaring for a month. I checked the generator oil, rubbing the dipstick between my fingers to check for grit. I sharpened the chainsaw, the file rasping against the metal teeth in the quiet garage. I made sure my truck was plugged in and the battery tender was green. By 6 p.m., the sky had turned that bruised purple-black color that means heavy snow, and the wind was already whipping the pines into a frenzy. The temperature was dropping like a stone, 10 degrees, 0, 10 below. I locked the door, cracked a beer, and settled in. The house felt solid. I had built a lot of it myself, reinforced the beams, insulated the walls until it was basically a thermos. The storm hit like a freight train around 8 p.m. The wind wasn't howling, it was shrieking. It sounded like a jet engine parked on my roof. The snow was coming down so hard it looked like a solid white curtain when I peered out the kitchen window. You couldn't see the tree line. You couldn't even see the shed 30 feet away. My power flickered and died at 9:15 p.m. Right on schedule, I muttered to the empty room. I waited for the generator to kick on. It roared to life in the shed, a distant mechanical thrum that vibrated through the floorboards, and the lights buzzed back on, slightly dimmer but steady. I was set. I had heat, I had light, I had a freezer full of venison.
I could ride this out for a week if I had to. I sat in the living room cleaning my rifle, a Remington 700 that I used for deer season, not because I expected trouble, but because it's something to do with your hands when the world outside is chaotic. It's calming. Take it apart, clean the bolt, oil the action, put it back together. Click, clack, order. Around midnight, the wind shifted. It dropped from a scream to a low, throaty moan. The snow was still falling in sheets, piling up against the windows, but the violence had dialed back just enough to let other sounds through. That's when I heard it. It was faint at first. I thought it was a branch scraping against the siding, or maybe the roof settling under the weight of the snow. Scrape. Scrape. Then a pause. Then a voice. "Daddy?" My hands froze on the bolt carrier group. The smell of Hoppy's No. 9 gun oil filled my nose, suddenly sharp and stinging. I don't have kids. I've never been married. I live 5 miles from the nearest neighbor, an old guy named Peterson who lives alone and is half-deaf. TV, I told myself. Radio interference. But the TV was off. The radio was silent. I sat perfectly still, listening. My heart started a slow, heavy thudding in my chest. "Daddy, I'm cold." It was a little girl's voice, high-pitched, trembling. It sounded like she was standing right on my front porch, her lips pressed against the crack in the door. I stood up, putting the rifle down on the bench. My brain started doing backflips, trying to make sense of the data. Car crash. Maybe a family slid off the county road and the kid wandered here. It was possible. The road was a few miles away, but in a storm, people get turned around. They see a light. They walk toward it. If there was a kid out there, she would be dead in 10 minutes without gear. The wind chill was 40 below. I grabbed my heavy Carhartt coat and my high-powered flashlight. I walked to the front door. I didn't open it. Rule number 1 of living in the woods: you verify before you open. You don't just throw the door wide because someone knocks. I unlocked the deadbolt but kept the chain on. I peered through the people. Nothing but swirling white. The porch light was a hazy yellow blur. "Hello?" I shouted through the wood. "Daddy," the voice answered instantly. "Open the door." It was loud, clear, and it was definitely coming from the other side of the door. But something about it made the hair on my arms stand up. It was flat. It didn't sound like a panicked kid. It didn't have the hiccuping sob of a crying child. It sounded like someone reading a line from a script. "Daddy, open the door." I checked the security monitor I had rigged up in the kitchen. It was an old system, grainy, black and white, but it covered the driveway and the shed. On the screen, the snow was a blizzard of static. I could barely make out the shape of my truck. Useless, I grunted. I turned it off. I went back to the living room. I put a log on the fire. The wood hissed as the flames licked the bark. I thought about Peterson down the road. I wondered if his power was out. I wondered if he was okay. I almost called him, but I didn't want to be the guy who calls just to say it's snowing. So I sat there, alone, and the silence grew heavier. I stepped back from the door, the chain rattling. "Is your dad with you?" I yelled. "Where is your mom?" "I'm cold," the voice said. Same intonation, same pitch. "Let me in." It ignored my questions. It just repeated the prompt. I moved to the living room window, which looks out onto the porch. I kept the lights off inside so I could see out without turning the glass into a mirror. I cracked the blinds just an inch. The porch light was buzzing, casting a sickly yellow cone of light onto the decking. The snow on the porch was deep, maybe 6 inches already, drifting against the railing. I looked for the kid. I expected to see a small shape huddled against the doorframe, a peep coat, a hat. There was no one there. The porch was empty. But the snow wasn't. There were footprints. They started at the stairs and led straight to the door. But they weren't kid footprints. They were massive. They were size 13, maybe 14. Heavy, lug-soled boots. The kind of boots you wear for logging or oil rig work.
The kind that leave a tread deep enough to hold water. And here's the thing that made my blood run cold. The thing that made my mechanic's brain stall out. There were no drag marks. There were no smaller footprints next to them. Just one set of massive tracks walking casually up the steps and stopping right in front of the door. "Daddy," the voice said again. It came from the empty air where the giant footprint stood. "I'm hurting." I stumbled back from the window, tripping over the coffee table. The flashlight rolled across the floor. This wasn't a lost kid. This was a trap. I grabbed my phone. I dialed 911. My fingers were clumsy, missing the buttons. 911, what is your emergency?" The dispatcher sounded exhausted, her voice tinny. "I have a prowler," I said, keeping my voice low, huddled in the corner of the kitchen. "I'm at 440 Ridge Road. Someone is on my porch." "Sir, we have a travel ban in effect," she said. "The plows are pulled off the road. We can't get a unit to you until the storm breaks. Is he trying to break in?" "I don't need a plow," I hissed. "I need a cop. There's a guy on my porch pretending to be a little girl." There was a silence on the line, a long, static-filled pause. "Say again, sir?" "He's using a recording or something. He's got a speaker. He's trying to lure me to open the door. He's standing right there." "Okay," she said, her voice shifting to professional calm, but I could hear the tension. "Do not open the door. Is he armed?" "I don't know. I can't see him, but the footprints are huge, and he's not leaving." "Lock everything. Go to a secure room. Do you have a weapon?" "Yes," I said. "I have a rifle and a shotgun." "Do not go outside," she said. "We will get there as soon as we can, but it might be hours, maybe morning." "Hours? The roads are impassable, sir. Even the snowcats are stuck." I hung up. I was on my own. I went back to the rifle on the bench. I slapped the bolt back in. I loaded a magazine with shaky hands. I racked the slide. Clack, clack. The sound echoed in the quiet house like a gavel. "Please," the voice said from the porch. "It hurts." It sounded so real. That was the worst part. If I hadn't seen the boots, I would have opened that door. I would have died opening that door. Then the voice moved. "Sir, are you still there?" the dispatcher asked. "I'm here," I said. "I'm watching the door." "Do you see anyone?" "No, but he's there. I can feel him." "Okay, stay on the line with me." We stayed on the line for 10 minutes. She asked me about my weapon. She asked me about the layout of the house. It was comforting, in a way, to have a voice in the dark. But then the line went dead. Click, just static. I looked at my phone. No service. The storm had taken the tower. Now I was truly alone. It drifted to the left. "Let me in," it said. It sounded like it was coming from the side yard now, near the kitchen window. I crouched low and moved to the kitchen, sliding in my socks. I stayed below the windowsill. "Daddy, I'm freezing,"
It was right outside the glass. I stood up slowly and peeked through the corner of the curtain. I looked at the snow under the window. It was pristine, smooth, unbroken white. The wind had sculpted it into perfect drifts. There were no footprints leading from the porch to the side of the house. There were no tracks in the yard. The voice was coming from the air, floating outside the glass, but nothing was walking there. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My hands, usually steady as a rock, were shaking. I understand mechanics. I understand physics. If a mass moves through a medium, it leaves a trace. If a man walks through snow, he leaves a hole. "Who are you?" I shouted at the window. "Show yourself." "I'm cold," the voice replied instantly. "Open the window." It wasn't a recording. It was responding to me. It heard me, but it wasn't a person. I backed away into the hallway. I felt like a rat in a maze. I checked the back door, locked. I checked the basement door, locked. I sat in the hallway, the rifle across my knees, watching the doors. The voice circled the house. It went to the back door. "Daddy." It went to the bedroom window. "Please." It went back to the front porch. "Help me." It was testing the perimeter. It was looking for a weak point. It was looking for a mistake.
And the whole time, I knew that if I looked out, I wouldn't see tracks. I visualized the massive footprints on the porch, the only physical evidence. Whoever, whatever, had walked up those steps was anchored there. But its voice could throw itself around the house like a ventriloquist. Or maybe it wasn't alone. Maybe the big boots were waiting at the door, silent, holding a knife or a hammer, while something else, something invisible, circled the house to spook me, to flush me out. I sat there for 6 hours. I didn't sleep. I didn't drink. I just listened to that little girl's voice beg for her life in the middle of a blizzard. "I'm dying, Daddy. It's so cold. Why won't you help me?" It wore me down. It scraped against my sanity like sandpaper. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I missed the tracks. Maybe the wind covered them. Maybe there really is a kid. I almost stood up once. I almost went to the door. I had my hand on the lock. Then I looked at the rifle in my hands. I looked at the cold blue steel barrel. Trust the metal, I told myself. Trust the physics. No tracks means no kid. Mass equals displacement. I stayed seated. I let the guilt eat me alive, but I stayed seated. I remembered the camera I had installed on the back porch last summer. It wasn't connected to the main monitor. It fed to an app on my tablet. I grabbed the tablet from the coffee table. I opened the app. It buffered. Loading. Loading. Then the image popped up. The back porch. It was dark, but the infrared illuminator was working. I saw the snow piling up on the deck chairs. I saw the barbecue grill covered in a white mound. And I saw something else. Movement. Just at the edge of the frame. Something tall. It stepped into view for a second. It looked like a leg and a heavy pant. Then it stepped back. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to come back. "I see you," I whispered, but the screen stayed empty. Was it a glitch, a shadow, or was he taunting me? I took a screenshot. My finger hovered over the record button, but before I could hit it, the screen went black. Connection lost. He had cut the power to the camera. Or the cold had killed the battery. Either way, I was blind again. I couldn't just sit there. I had to do something. I went to the utility closet. I grabbed a handful of 3-inch deck screws and my cordless impact driver. I went to the back door. Zip, zip, zip. I drove 3 screws through the door frame, sealing it shut. It ruined the trim, but I didn't care. I went to the side door. Zip, zip, zip. Sealed. I felt a little better. If he wanted in, he'd have to break the wood. He couldn't just pick the lock. But the windows? I couldn't screw the windows shut. They were glass. I dragged the bookshelf in front of the living room window. Books tumbled to the floor. I dragged the kitchen table in front of the sliding door. I was building a fortress, and the voice kept talking. "Daddy, what are you doing? Daddy, don't block me out." It knew what I was doing. It could hear the drill. "Go away," I screamed. "Leave me alone." "I can't," the voice said. "I'm part of the family now." The voice stopped at 5:45 a.m. It didn't fade out. It just cut off mid-sentence. "Daddy, Silence. The wind had died down. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky was turning that milky gray of dawn. I waited another hour. I waited until I could see the trees. I stood up. My knees popped. My back ached like I had carried a transmission all night. I walked to the front door. I looked through the peephole. Empty. I unlocked the deadbolt. Click. I unlocked the chain. Rattle. I opened the door. The cold air hit me in the face, crisp and clean. I looked at the porch. The snow had drifted during the night. It was piled up against the railing.
The footprints, those massive, deep boot prints, were almost gone. The wind had filled them in. They were just shallow depressions now, vague shadows in the snow. I walked out onto the porch, clutching the rifle. I looked around the side of the house. Nothing. No tracks circling the house. No sign of a struggle. No body. Just clean, white snow. I walked down the steps, placing my boots in the depressions of the intruder's tracks. My feet are size 11. These tracks swallowed mine. They were huge.
I followed them backward, down the walkway, to the driveway. And there, at the end of the driveway, they just stopped. They didn't lead to the road. They didn't lead to the woods. They just started in the middle of the driveway, as if the person had dropped out of the sky, walked to my door, stood there for 6 hours, and then vanished. I stood there in the driveway, shivering, looking at the empty road. I called the sheriff again. A deputy came out 2 hours later in a 4x4. He took a report. He looked at the melted tracks. He looked at me with that cabin fever look, the look that says, "You've been alone too long." "Probably just a drifter," he said, scribbling in his notebook. "Wind does funny things to sound. Maybe a bobcat? They sound like screaming kids sometimes." "It said words," I said. "It said, 'Let me in.'" "Drifter with the radio," he suggested, shrugging. "We'll keep an eye out." He didn't believe me. I don't blame him. I wouldn't believe me either. I went back inside. I didn't sleep that day. I spent the day fortifying. I installed deadbolts on every interior door. I ordered security cameras with audio and night vision. I cut down the shrubs around the porch to remove hiding spots. I'm a mechanic. I fix things. I diagnose problems and I replace parts. But I can't fix this because I know what I heard and I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere out there, in the deep woods, there is something that walks on 2 legs, wears heavy boots, and speaks with the stolen voice of a terrified child. It's a lure. It's a key. It knows that we are wired to protect. It knows that the sound of a crying child bypasses our logic and goes straight to our heart. It knows we are human, and it uses that humanity against us. I still live here. I'm not going to let some noise chase me off my land. But when the snow falls heavy, and the wind screams, and the world goes white, I put on my noise-canceling headphones, I turn up the music, and I lock the door. Because if I hear that voice again, if I hear it begging me to save it, I might just open it. And that's exactly what it wants. I still have that screenshot. It's blurry. You can't really tell what it is.
It looks like a tree trunk or a shadow, but I know what it is. It's proof. Proof that I'm not crazy. Proof that there are things in this world that don't follow the rules. Sometimes I show it to people at the bar. They laugh. They say, "Looks like Bigfoot." I don't laugh, because Bigfoot doesn't sound like a little girl. Bigfoot doesn't ask to be let in. Bigfoot doesn't know my name. And that's the part I never told the police. That last time the voice spoke, before it cut off, it didn't just say "Daddy." It said, "Daddy, let me in. Dave." My name is Dave. It knew who I was, and that means it's coming back. I think about that line a lot. Part of the family. What does that mean? Does it mean it watches me? Does it mean it lives in my woods? Or does it mean it's inside my head? I've read about things like this. Skinwalkers, wendigos, mimics. Folklore is full of monsters that steal voices. But reading about it is different than hearing it. Hearing it changes you. It breaks something in your brain. It breaks the part of you that trusts the world. I don't trust the woods anymore. I don't trust the dark. And I definitely don't trust the quiet. Because the quiet is just the pause between the screams. The sunrise that morning was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It started as a thin line of fire on the horizon, burning through the gray clouds. Then it turned pink, then gold. The light hit the snow and made it sparkle like millions of diamonds. It was blinding. I stood on the porch and just breathed. I breathed in the cold air. I breathed in the smell of pine and wood smoke. I was alive. I had survived the night. But survival leaves scars.
and mine are invisible. They are the flinch I feel when a floorboard creaks. They are the sweat on my palms when the phone rings. They are the rifle I keep by my bed, loaded, with the safety off. And they are the reason I will never, ever have children. Because I know that if I ever heard a real child calling me daddy, I wouldn't know if it was real, and I couldn't take that risk. So if you're ever driving through Ely in the winter, and you see a house with too many lights and bars on the windows, don't stop.
Don't knock. And for God's sake, don't ask for help. Because I'm not listening. I'm just waiting for the next storm. And I'm waiting for him to come back. And this time, I won't be hiding. I'll be hunting. Let's see who freezes first. Game on. Because I'm ready.